Well, 18 hammers standing, standing in a line. Well, it's 18 hammers standing, standing in a line. Well, it rang like silver and it shine like gold. Well, it rang like silver and it shine like gold. Well, I want of them hammers shoot. Well, it ring like mine. Well, I want of them hammers shoot. Well, it ring like mine. Well, it ring this hammer groove. Well, it rings.
What you just heard certainly was the root of the blues, and certainly with the prison work song, the Arhoolie. But we're going to take this to different heights today in the sense of how has this impacted really American music. And with us today is Larry Hoffman, Baltimore composer, educator, journalist, record producer, and he has composed many musics that feature blues and other origins of American soul and pop music. And this is not really anything new and unique. It's something that certainly the Sinfonietta will actually experiment and play George Gershwin. But this is rooted back in certainly early 20th century with Bela Bartok taking folk idioms as well as many other classical musics coming from really the depths of the folk musics of many different cultures. Larry, I want to thank you for coming, and certainly going to hopefully certainly educate and enlighten and entertain our audience today with really unique music that you have composed.
Thanks for having me, Barry. I appreciate it. And it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to hear this fine quartet play the piece in a little bit. And in considering differences between fine art concert music and blues as folk song in general, I had some ideas. Besides the obvious distinction of relying on improvisation, there exists elements such as musical architecture that support a larger work and the development of previous stated material that is used later in the piece in different ways, which produces both variety and coherence. This work is in arch form, meaning that it unfolds from the middle to the end in the reversed order of its progress from start to center. So that's an idea of a certain architecture that's been used quite a bit. There are 3 repeating elements: 4 choruses of original blues music, 4 appearances of a prison song inspired by 18 Hammers by Johnny Lee Moore, which we just heard at the very top of the show before Barry started talking, and a bridge section presented as a small fugue that separates each occurrence of the prison song and is rescored at each presentation. In the center, there's a development section that employs 12-tone music as well as a fantasia of sorts. The 4 choruses of blues are the only sections that repeat verbatim. The rest are varied in a number of ways at each occurrence. I'd originally intended to compose original field hollers as the architecture and the architectural pillars, but at the time I was composing this work, I was captivated by a particular prison song, the one we heard, which kept ringing in my mind's ear. It was part of a collection of field music recorded by the legendary folklorist Alan Lomax, entitled Sounds of the South, which I was reviewing at the time for an online magazine. I finally gave into my fascination with the tune and composed a section inspired directly by this haunting prison song. I've been criticized by the length of it before as a section, and my answer is always the same. The feeling evoked by these songs describe orally what these men must have experienced in that fierce Delta sun, working for no pay, chained from dawn till dusk, hour after hour, week after week, and year after year. Many blacks in the South were jailed for their color and used as a free workforce for the state. Many served long sentences, many died in prison. As they worked, they often sang these songs that made the work and the day go faster. Often they were call and response tunes, as this one is, and allowed for a rhythmic element that actually aligned with the specific task at hand. So I'm going to ask the cellist, Eric, to play what the leader would be singing. And then the violins, in this particular section, there are 4 versions of this. This particular section, the 2 violins are the rest of the chain gang answering. Notice I atonalized the language there. It's 20th century American music, so it's not meant to be a literal translation, obviously. And then the viola will play, it's Dominic, will play Hammer Striking Rock, which was actually their task for this particular song. They would be breaking huge boulders into rocks, and Dominic becomes this hammer. Now, that is literal in its placement rhythmically, and that's part of the fascination of this piece, because it's this monotonous sound that they all gear into while they're doing their job, which makes them kind of, I guess, hypnotized in a way that puts their work in a different light. So let's hear the entire quartet play that section, please. Okay, that comes back 4 times and is longer than that particular example, but that gives you the idea. As far as the blues choruses go, to give you an idea of the many ways material can be developed, we can hear the typical shuffle beat that I composed for the cello, and then how I use it later in the piece. For the blues sections, I composed classic but original 12-bar blues choruses that were meant to showcase the music as played by concert instruments. Later, I use a simple core element and vary it in the original cello rhythm and create more abstract music on top of it. This creates, as I said before, both variety and coherence as the piece progresses, although it is not usually perceived consciously as such by the listener. As you find all through classical music, when music comes back in different keys and is varied all the time, listeners getting a very coherent feeling about the piece without really realizing they're listening to pretty much the same music. Anyway, the cellist will please play the shuffle bass. I'm sure you've heard this, all you blues fans. And then the entire quartet with classic blues over top of that. Okay, thank you. The bridge section is known as a fugato, which is a small fugue inserted into a larger piece. And fugue, for all you who have been to conservatories or music school, will learn that it's a compositional technique, not a form. I remember that well, and it's well said. It's often based on a single motive that is called the subject that controls the entire section or piece. The fugue finds its roots in the medieval canon or round and found its ultimate perfection in the hands of Johann Sebastian Bach, who immortalized the technique in his work, The Art of Fugue, among others, which he created to teach those who came after him how to compose in this manner. The fugue is a contrapuntal technique, meaning that it achieves its texture by the combination of 2 or more rhythmically melodic voices moving independently and linearly. This is called polyphonic music, as is the texture called polyphony, made of many voices. When composing this work, I was out with friends, drinking with friends, and a jazzy rhythmic idea came to me, and I retreated to a small part of the restaurant or whatever, and sketched out the entire rhythmic feel of the fugue, the entire one, and then assigned note values to it later. And you'll notice it's all based on the recurring motive. Dominic, the violist, will play the subject so you can hear that. Okay, and then the entire quartet will play a few measures to show you how at least three of the voices come in one after the other. There's also some elements of the prison song in there too, with the call and response and the rhythmic chorus also. That happened unconsciously with me, actually, I guess. To develop this segment, I employed 20th century technique of serialism, which is 12-tone music, which basically the concept is that there's no hierarchy of tones as there is in tonal music. If you have a piece in C, C is the most important tone, and then the other tones go less and less more of importance. And if the piece modulates, then there's another tone that achieves a hierarchy. In the 40s and before, this was changed, atonalized. The idea was no piece, no tone was more important than any of the other. And then that spawned 12-tone music, where it became highly organized, a highly organized approach to make various rows and all kinds of permutations, which came up with some tremendously interesting music, if not tremendously popular. If you listen closely, you'll hear the similarity of the rhythm of the fugue with an entirely different melodic structure, which is 12-tone. Thank you. And that's pretty much the demonstration of it.
Well, again, I think certainly that's very interesting in the sense of, again, taking that folk idiom of a music, taking it to a higher plane of actually, here we dissected the motivation behind this piece. And I certainly want to thank Dominic and the New Millennium Orchestra String Quartet. And now we will actually hear this put to whole by the string quartet. Yes, that the New Millennium Orchestra String Quartet.
That was beautiful, man. That was great. Beautiful.
Thank you. The New Millennium String Quartet, Dominic Johnson. You know, and what's interesting about blues, certainly, I think, certainly being a people's music, a folk music, is all about really the relationship between the musician and the audience and the musician, what the musician gets out of things, what the audience gets out of the music, and actually had the power of binding a community that had to go from those work songs and slavery to bind them together into a community. And what I just like to ask the musicians is, in the sense is, like, the feeling that they got from playing this music versus, let's say, any other classically composed music. Is there a difference, and maybe what would that difference be?
Well, this is certainly based
Project.
on a different scale system. So the scale system that this is based on is a blues scale system. So we have different inflections.
Okay, so now what do those inflections, I mean, allow you to do, and what kind of feelings then did you get out of those inflections?
Well, sort of similar to gypsy music, which has a lot of visceral elements as well. There's really nothing you could do that would be too much. I think with this music, you could put every ounce of emotion into the music, and it would accept it. Whereas some other music is more delicate. You couldn't do that to that, but this music has that generosity.
Okay, so the music, unfortunately, didn't mic the musicians to speak, but again, the idea of, delicate music versus, again, how much you could put into the music and allow, and I think in that sense, being allowed to give of yourself into the music, certainly one is a release and the ability to feel something different than what would be normally classically composed music, is what I'm hearing from this. And I think, in some sense, that's exactly what blues does to the musician, in the sense that catharsis, it was able to, one, allow the musician themselves to actually transcend that workaday world into something much more sacred, and I think that's what then they gave to the audience, and certainly being able to, I myself felt a lot of this catharsis even within this piece, and the way that it was structured and ending as it did certainly had that kind of a release as well.
The sound production is very different. The blues quartet that we played allows us to experiment with different types of sound that we would normally do for classical performance. For example, some of the sul ponticello sound. It's intense sound, so it's
Right, you were playing,
also
you were
sound like
playing
a-
some beautiful Sol Ponticello. I was noticing that.
Yeah, so it's used in classical music, but not for solo.
It's
For those that I have
in line with that. That's part of my challenge as a composer doing this kind of music. Like, how can I evoke the actual spirit of they who played this music through the instruments and the Sol Ponticello and
Yeah, I thought that was a great effect.
oh, thank you. It's and also the rhythmic part of the thing is extremely difficult. The first piece I tried like this, I don't know how many hours I spent on one measure to get that just little, because being a guitarist who's spent a lot of time playing blues, I can pick it up and like, you know, okay, maybe I'm not, no. You know, I can rip off some licks, so you try to write it down. It's exceedingly difficult to write that stuff down and get it to work so that I can give it to somebody that's never played blues before and they're gonna swing with it. And you probably didn't notice this because there's no way you would, but the last prison song, I finally figured out how to notate it. It's written in a different meter so that it's easier to read. Did you know? Yeah, it's a little harder when you, in the earlier versions, but you know, being lazy, I didn't go back and change the first ones. But it's very difficult to get that feeling of swing into it. And a Swedish string quartet picked up on this piece on MySpace. I have it on MySpace. And I don't know if they had ever heard blues before in their lives, and they said, we really like this music, we would like to play it, and so they played it in Sweden. And there's a Swedish blues club or, you know, jazz and blues, and they came to hear it and they said, we really got the feeling of blues out of that. And then I realized that's really one of my missions to make this a universal, more universal. Like we all know the gypsy music from Brahms, and we know the Turkish music from Mozart, and we know Czechoslovakian from Janáček, and the Hungarian from Bartók, and we treasure that music as if it were our own because they gave it to us like that. So that's one of the, in line with what you said, that's one of the difficulties, challenges.
And then the other question, and again, I want to thank the New Millennium Orchestra String Quartet for actually interpreting this piece so well this afternoon. And but to Larry, you know, again, the question always comes to, you know, why then the necessity to go into this direction?
You're going to take me there. Okay. When I was first started playing music, my first job that I actually got paid to play was in Massachusetts in Cape Cod, and I had the opportunity to be a house folk singer for some of the most popular folk singers of the day, and one of my then idols, John Hammond Jr. was playing there. This is a 63, 62, something like that, and blues was not very well known at that time in the white community. And then I had the incredible honor of playing with Skip James, the Bentonian, Mississippi blues musician who is regarded by blues aficionados as one of the greatest geniuses of the music. And we hit it off. We played music every day, and he asked me to teach him a song called Sportin' Life that the Lovin' Spoonful did with great harp part by John Sebastian. And he asked me to teach him the song, and I said, you know, Skip, this is against all the rules because, you know, I'm this 19-year-old white kid, and you're the blues man. I said, you have to teach me songs. I can't teach. He said, no, I want you to teach it to me. I want you to teach it to me. So I taught it to him. Well, he's a guitar player, a tremendously interesting guitar player, by the way. And he went right to the piano and started playing it on piano. He's a tremendously interesting pianist as well. And we started to play a duet every night as a segue between my set and his. And so he was playing at the Newport Blues Festival. It was a folk festival, but they started to have a blues element. I think it was in 63 or 64. And he invited me to come down there. And so I did. And during the days you could hitchhike, me and my then girlfriend hitchhiked down there. And Skip came out and he said, "You two look very nice and very familiar." That's exactly what he said, verbatim. And they said, "Come on backstage." And we're the only two white people backstage. And he said, "I'd like you to meet some of my friends, Bucka, Son," and for all you blues people out there, there's Bucka White and Son House and all the blues giants that had just come up from the South to these adoring white audiences that they've never before seen in their lives. And all of a sudden, from out of jails or wherever they were down there, Bucka was in jail up until that time, I think fairly recently.
Robert Pete Williams.
Robert P. Williams, and all, they were all like treated to this incredible adulation by a brand new white audience. And so I'm sitting there like in awe of these, my blues idols. And then Skip said, "I want you to get on stage with me and after my set and play the same tune we played at the club and then do a set of your own." And I look at Bucka White, and Bucka White looked at me like, you know, and all of a sudden I got it. That it's not about how I could play the guitar or sing or knew their songs or whatever, it's about their culture. And this is a music of the black culture, the African American culture, and they sacrificed and, earned the right to have this as their music in my mind. And I said, told Skip, I can't go up there. I can't go up on your stage and do this. And I pretty much changed the direction of my life in a lot of ways, realizing that this was their music, and I treasure their music. So this is my way of participating in their music and doing something different with it than perhaps they could do, and bringing it to other people, making a more universal sense of it to bring it to other people who never before would have heard it. And if you have composed a piece for the Chicago Sinfonietta called 3 Songs for Blues Band and Orchestra that John Primer will be playing, that it's really wonderful to hear John play this. I composed all the orchestral parts, and he's improvising completely. Everything he plays is improvised, and he's bringing this tremendous blues music to my work. And as we were working on it yesterday, I just was marveling at him playing, to say, like, I can play guitar, but you're a blues man. And he had a big smile on his face, because it's magic when you hear a real blues man play. It's just magical. And I feel blessed in a way that I learned that from the real artists of the day when they're first playing it. Long answer to a short question.
But I think in some cases, what is happening, that everybody, the one question that a lot of people ask is really, certainly this is, in Chicago being the blues capital of the world and has a strong heritage, and the tradition lives as in the hands of John Primer or every number of great blues men and women that live in Chicago. Well, what is then the future of this blues tradition? Where is this going? I mean, certainly this piece plays a certain particular role in this continuum of
I'd
tradition.
be very proud to think that that could be true. But as we talked about many times and had panels at the Great Chicago Blues Festival that you created and direct every year, we have all these incredible blues minds in Chicago, as well as players, authors, and radio personalities, and people that have devoted a lot of their lives to the blues. And everyone has a different take on it. But as I say a lot, Paul Oliver, the great, probably the dean of blues musicologists, and Sam Charters, one of the earliest blues writers, have both told me they believe that blues is dead or dying because the culture is has changed so much. And Paul Oliver said eloquently in Blues Fell this morning that if the black American is raising his lifestyle to a more acceptable and finer level, losing the blues is a small price to pay, which is another thought in that direction.
And again, that certainly is an exclusive look, certainly from Sam Charters and Paul Oliver. But in some sense, though, this community certainly, there's some people say that, okay, well, that tradition has gone to rap or hip hop or whatever it may be, and certainly their sampling of, Junior Wells and their materials or whatever certainly is also part of this continuum. But when you in Chicago have the legacy of certainly Lonnie Brooks with his sons performing blues and in a modern context, and
Well, there is that thought that every generation says that blues is dead. and yet it keeps living, keeps surviving. And certainly if you go into the black areas of any city almost, and through Mississippi, the juke joints, you find enough actual authentic blues music living that you can't really say it's, you know, that it's dead, because there it is.
And I think, and then, therefore, well, where do you find it? Certainly, let it be at Harold Washington Library's beautiful auditorium here, or out in the Dominican University, which also will be hosting the Living Blues Symposium in a couple weeks as well, or the Chicago Symphony, the Symphony Center having the Sinfonietta perform this, or this was performed at the Chicago Cultural Center, or let it be those venues that do host the bluesmen of today. You know, but I think it's the festival too that.
Well, most telling is the Chicago Blues Festival.
The Chicago Blues Festival. I think in this is the 25th annual Chicago Blues Festival, and certainly for 2.5 decades, there's been a number of blues festivals that have popped up, and this again, giving a celebration of this tradition is really important, and certainly provides an opportunity for this next generation to be accepted on a festival stage, and might not have to, although it certainly is, Chicago's known as the house music capital. Well, this blues, let it be the boogie woogie piano players, this came out of the house, and so it's all again part of that continuum. But again, the acceptance, it doesn't have to be that little small family-oriented congregation of part of that house party, but certainly it goes to being able to expose the music to a larger audience at festivals, and more than that they could ever imagine playing at a Southside club that might hold 50 to 100 people. When you say that's a 50, if they play there once a week for a whole year, they're performing for, at one time, a larger audience than if they've performed at a weekly gig in their neighborhood.
Right, but I also feel that that enclave, the black enclave with the music is the fiercest way to hear that music, is the most pure way to hear that music, because it's so much of a fabric of their lives and their families' lives and their parents' lives, and there's always been a juke joint in the neighborhood. And there's nothing like that, experiencing it if you've been in Mississippi, which I know you have, and gone into a juke joint in a small town in Mississippi and know that it's been there since, that tradition has been there since the 20s at least. So, I agree that your festival, perhaps the greatest festival, it allows so many more people to hear this music and share in that music, which is a very important aspect of it. But I don't think that would keep it alive as much as the inner city, neighborhood clubs where the children learn to play in it, and it's like passed on.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, right, and I think certainly that's really what's going to keep the music alive, is certainly within the community, and let it be in a juke joint in Mississippi or a juke joint in South Side of Chicago. It's certainly, that's where people are, cutting their teeth on being able to figure out, well, what does it mean to be a performance, and that they're going to be booed off a stage at one of these juke joints a lot easier or faster than if they were performing in a large venue like the festival.
Right. I think that, not to bring jazz into it, a whole other subject, but I think that blues is really doing a lot better, thriving a lot better than jazz is, and it's not relying on the academic world to make it have it survive. And it's almost like the academic world is giving it life support, whereas blues is still really vital, I think, today in the areas where it exists.
Well, again, we're here speaking of the blues, and after a unique performance by the New Millennium Orchestra String Quartet of Larry Hoffman String Quartet number 1, The Blues. I probably have a few minutes you just have to project a little bit on questions from the audience.
I'd just like to interject and say what a wonderful performance that they gave, and to thank them very much for showing up and doing that. They really put a lot of heart and soul into it. Very much appreciated. Get another hand for them.
Anybody? Yes.
I was wondering, you're talking about the Newport Blues Festival, and you recognize it as part of Black culture, and kind of back away from trying to be part of that music.
Yes.
Do you think that's that's something that should be maintained, these like cultural boundaries?
I don't like to tell anybody what to do, you know. If that's what you're asking, do you think I did the right thing and everybody else that didn't? I know well, I don't, you know, I'm not challenging you on that. I'm just asked to try to figure out what you're saying. I know a white blues piano player who achieved a lot of fame with a very important white blues band around that time, and I related that story to him, and he told me I missed my opportunity. You know, it's a whole other take on it, like, hey, you could have really gotten somewhere had you done that. And he didn't get it. You know, he goes a whole different direction, and he has found some bluesmen, and he plays on all their records. And I know a lot of, you know, people that do that, and I think, you know, I don't subscribe to that or whatever. I think that if I wanted to be really extreme about it, which some people that know me would not be surprised at, but if I would really be extreme about it, I would say that, you know, in slavery, one of the things that slavers, black people could not own anything. And when you look at like all the famous and rich bluesmen, Stevie Ray Vaughan, you know him as well as I do, you can count the black ones on maybe one hand. And, you know, in a way of looking at it, like they can't own their music. I mean, it is their music. I mean, without a doubt, they're the ones that created this music. So no one, for example, doubts that like Celtic music is not Irish. And, you know, I mean, that's fine. Everybody accepts that. And country music, by and large, is white. And everybody accepts that. But blues and jazz, for some reason, ownership is kind of denied, cultural ownership. It was basically my experience of their music, you know, that let me know I could do this music, but I could never be that music. And I feel privileged kind of to know the difference because I've heard it. And I think a lot of people, most people take what they hear on the radio and what other people tell them to listen to without really exploring the actual roots of it. And that's too bad, really, because that's where the most intense expression of that music is. If that answers the question, or if that not really answers the question, shows you where I'm at with it, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just wondering, I guess, what you're getting at, if you have goals at that time, in relation to cultural boundaries and cultural identity with your music.
Well, I mean,
hear it.
I mean, the cultural boundaries, I think, is sort of where I think, and I don't want to put words in Larry's mouth, but in the sense that, again, the idea of, you know, being able to have ownership of one's own culture, in some sense, sets those boundaries. And certainly in America, where everything seems to be shared, or everything seems to be owned, or everything seems to be leased, you know,
Right.
you know,
Good
you don't
word
want to
for it.
necessarily present somebody's own culture by having them lease it back.
And there are blues festivals that have entirely white players. The whole roster is white. And that's up to you or someone or anybody to say if that, you know, their feelings about it. But if someone claimed that there's no difference between the musical expression, I would say, you know, I feel sorry for someone that didn't hear the difference. And I think the difference is beautiful. In other words, I don't feel that it's exclusionary and segregationist and like that. I think that there's a beautiful difference to the music because of that. It adds a tremendous amount because it's got the whole depth of the culture to it, which is my apprehension of it or whatever.
And then the other thing is the whole idea of authenticity. You know, I think that's been sociologists' direction for the last couple of years. This Dave Grazian, who got his degree from the University of Chicago and is now at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote about just even the authenticity of the blues clubs in Chicago. I mean, well, one, you know, it is authentic. It's happening at the moment, no matter where it's at. It certainly is not, you know, the 708 Club of 1954 when Buddy Guy got off the train and saw Muddy Waters performing, and he was starving, and all of a sudden took the stage, and Muddy just, you know, went ahead and bought him a pig ear sandwich or a salami sandwich to get him some food. But it is what's happening today. This is as authentic. This is what's happening today. Let it be with classical music or let it be with blues. I mean, this is what, again, a certain particular expression. And so in some cases, one may say that, well, is the imitation of what that 1954 record of Juke, Let It Be Juke or Little Walter, and that ensemble in some cases is an archetype that is then imitated over and over by really, again, people from outside the culture. And therefore then it's an imitation. And is that then authentic? Well, it's authentic for them, possibly. Is it, you know, and for a particular audience. And I think, again, what Larry was also saying is that he wouldn't tell anybody not to or tell somebody, you know, but he does have his feelings. But I think in some cases, well, where does all that fit in? And what Muddy Waters and Brownie McGhee wrote and sang about was that blues had a baby and they called it rock and roll. Well, those certainly are the babies of what came out of the fields and came out of really the result of the Middle Passage. That's where the blues came out of. And as was explained about the scales that were performed by the quartet is out of the ordinary that they usually play. Well, those are truly the Africanisms that make the blues that music.
Right, and they were talking about the performance technique of Sol Ponticello, which is playing up near the bridge, and the hammer striking rock, the percussive elements, which are also Africanisms that came into the blues. And what Dominic was referring to is a 12-tone, the pentatonic blues scale, which is not heard really in most classical music. But like I said, I wouldn't tell anyone, you know, I don't claim to write the book on, you know, what is right and what is wrong. But that whole syndrome allowed me to find my way as to where my place was in this music. Because I had, you know, Skip James and I had played music for like a week or two every day. And, you know, I learned what he was about. I learned what that music was about from him, which is like kind of getting the Holy Grail from, you know, and I know what, you know, I understood what it's about. And so, I mean, thankfully, I was able to find a different, you know, another path that I think is legitimate and plays a different role. And also has allowed me to appreciate that music even more. The really authentic blues. I appreciate it so much more having, you know, that have had that feelings for so long about that. Yes?
And then writing something like this is such a wonderful way for you to give back to that music to which you're so indebted, but at the same time maintaining your own identity.
Thank you for saying that.
And it's just a wonderful way you bridge that and also giving back to the community, because now here's this wonderful piece that most people will be able to, that's for the ages. I mean, they will always be.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. And that's kind of my inspirations in that way have been Bartók, Janáček, and Brahms, who's and every time, I don't know if you know Ligeti, the great Hungarian composer whose music is so abstract sometimes that you know, it's like, how, you know, he invented this whole new music for orchestra, and I just found out he's indebted to Hungarian folk music as I start to read more about him. So as you read more about these composers, you find that one of the greatest loves in their life was the folk music of their of their land. Janacek was involved with like writing the speech patterns of Czechoslovakians, which is wonderfully, you know, you see his music, it's very difficult, and you wonder like, where are those rhythms from? I've never seen those rhythms before, and that's the speech patterns he was trying to. And on the other hand, Messiaen was involved writing down the bird calls, which is like a little, you know, going a different path, but in the same way, finding a way to express something very beautiful that, you know, he can't be a bird, so to speak, but, you know, he's expressing that beauty in music that he finds, and Brahms with his gypsy songs, loved the gypsy songs. And from my reading, I mean, it wasn't even the authentic ones. He took like the commercial gypsy things, but he'd be doing them, and some women that would find him in a bar drinking, and they'd say, "Oh, Hannes," you know, which kind of gave him up. And he wouldn't be ashamed at all. He'd get up and go right to the piano and start playing these gypsy melodies I mean, I think that's all through, as Barry was saying earlier. And in fact, if you looked at the way early, when you have the liturgical music, you know, of the church, you have also this folk song that was creeping in with Michaud and Mass of the Armed Man, which was a folk song that was used as a ground melody for this liturgical music. So that was always it was always part of serious music. The folk song. Brahms thought that for the folk song was the most perfect music. But yet he didn't, you know, go off and run away with the gypsies, although he probably wanted to, part of it.
Any other questions?
I do appreciate your comments, so thank you. It was very nice. Thank you.
We want to thank you all for coming, and we want to certainly thank the New Millennium Orchestra String Quartet for their great performance and reading of Larry Hoffman's String Quartet number 1, The Blues, Larry Hoffman. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.